My name is Marion. I'm 66 years old and I've always believed in family first, until the night my family undid itself in silence. It was a Sunday evening, the kind of quiet gathering we used to call a simple family dinner. Nothing fancy. Just roast chicken, green beans, and Harold's favorite peach cobbler. My son Cameron sat across from me, laughing at some story his wife told about a grocery store mix-up. Delilah, his wife, was glowing that evening, though I couldn't tell if it was from joy or something else. You're listening to this story on Renvenge Zinnia, where buried truths are spoken at last in the voice of those who lived them. If you've ever sat quietly at a family table, swallowing doubt just to keep the peace, if you've ever felt something was off but smiled anyway, then this story might be more yours than you think. Take a moment to subscribe, not just to this channel, but to the idea that your voice, your truth, deserves to be heard. We held hands before dinner like we always did, and for a moment everything felt intact. But you know how some silences hum louder than words? That's what the air felt like something was pressing against it, waiting. After dinner, Delilah came up beside me in the kitchen. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't even blinking. She leaned close and in the softest whisper said, "I'm pregnant." I turned to look at her, already sensing something wasn't right. But then she added 6 more words. And those words, they didn't just break the peace of that evening, they shattered everything I thought I knew about loyalty, about trust, and about the man I married. The moment I placed the last dish on the table, I felt it. The stillness. That kind of silence where nothing's gone wrong yet, but something's about to. The roast was perfect. The bread was still warm. The napkins were folded like they used to be when Cameron was little, and I'd throw him birthday parties with paper crowns and cupcakes shaped like baseballs. Harold sat at the head of the table, sipping his water like it was bourbon, quiet but watchful. Delilah and Cameron were seated across from each other, her smile sweet and practiced, his eyes scanning his plate like he didn't quite know where he belonged anymore. I'd spent 3 days preparing that dinner, not for the food, but for the moment. So I let the conversation roll. I let Delilah chatter about baby names and prenatal vitamins. I let Cameron nod, silent, occasionally laughing at something Harold muttered. And then, just as I was refilling everyone's water glasses, I said it. "You know," I began, keeping my voice light, almost amused, "I've been wondering, who do you think the baby will look like?" Cameron chuckled. "Hopefully not me when I was a baby. My ears could catch radio signals." Delilah smiled, too quickly. "Well, I think it'll have Cameron's sense of humor," she said, glancing at me like she was checking my temperature. I smiled back, calm, careful. "Funny thing about genetics," I said, walking back to the kitchen counter. "They skip around sometimes. You never quite know what you'll get. Eye color, blood type, even paternity." And that was when the room froze. Delilah's fork hovered mid-air. Cameron blinked, caught off guard. Harold didn't even bother looking up. I returned to the table with a plain white envelope in my hand, placed it gently next to Delilah's plate. "You left this here last time," I said. Cameron leaned in. "What is it?" "Go ahead," I replied, keeping my eyes on Delilah. "She can open it." Delilah's hands trembled slightly as she reached for it, but I didn't let her take it all the way. I slid the document out myself, 3 pages folded and slightly crinkled from where I'd handled them earlier that afternoon. I turned the top page toward Cameron and laid it flat on the table. He read the first few lines, his jaw clenched. "You're saying..." His voice cracked. "This is a paternity test?" I nodded. "From Gene Tech Labs. The same place Delilah visited about 6 weeks ago. I made a copy of the report. The original is safe." Cameron stared at the bottom of the page. "Probability of paternity. 99.7%, he read aloud. "For someone named Noel Reyes." He looked up, stunned. "Is that our gardener?" Delilah finally broke her silence. "Cameron, please." "No," he cut her off. Just tell me, is that true? Did you sleep with him?" Her lips quivered. Her eyes were wide and glossy. "It was a mistake." "I wasn't asking for the backstory," Cameron said, his voice suddenly calm in a way that made it worse. "Just the truth." Delilah exhaled, then nodded, barely. Harold dropped his fork. I stood still, watching the whole thing unfold like it was a play I'd seen in rehearsal dozens of times, which it was. Cameron looked at me. "Mom, you knew?" I met his gaze. I knew something didn't add up, so I checked. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't want you to be the last one to find out the truth. Delilah put her hands on her belly, a gesture that might have been maternal once, but now just looked staged. "I didn't know how to tell you," she whispered. "I panicked. I thought if I said the baby was yours, it would fix everything." "You thought lying would fix it?" Cameron said, eyes burning now. "You thought giving my mother the idea that her husband might have fathered your child would be, what, a safe cover?" Delilah shook her head. "I just wanted to keep the family together." "The family?" Cameron echoed. "You set fire to it." There was no yelling, no plates breaking. Just truth dropped like stone after stone into the center of that table. And then I leaned in, my voice barely above a whisper. "You should tell the whole table who the father is," I said, turning to Delilah, "before I do." Her lip trembled. "Say his name," I said again, out loud for everyone to hear. She looked around as if hoping someone, anyone, might step in and rescue her. No one did. "It's Noel," she said finally, "the gardener." The words hung in the air like smoke. Cameron stood up. He didn't yell, didn't throw anything. He just looked at Delilah and said, "You don't get to sit at this table and play the victim." Delilah opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Harold stood slowly and placed his napkin on the table. "Excuse me," he murmured, then walked out of the room. I didn't follow him. I didn't need to. Cameron was still standing, breathing heavy, trying to piece together the version of reality he thought he lived in just 10 minutes ago. "I was going to be a father," he muttered. "You still can be," Delilah said, a little too quickly. Cameron shook his head. I was going to be a father to my child, not someone else's. He turned to me, and in that moment I saw the little boy I once held in my arms, confused, broken, but finally standing. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, "for not seeing what you did." I touched his arm. "You don't need to apologize for being blind," I said. "Just don't choose to stay that way now." Delilah reached out. "Cameron, please." But he stepped away, and I knew, so did she. He wouldn't be coming back to that seat. Dinner ended without dessert. I cleared the plates while Cameron sat in the den, quiet, holding the test results like they might explain something if he stared long enough. Later that night, he came into the kitchen. "Do you think people like her ever really change?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Sometimes they do. But only after they lose something they thought they could keep lying for." He nodded. "Good," he said, "because I'm done being lied to." And with that, he went home. Alone. Not broken, just beginning again. The house was quiet the next morning, but not the kind of quiet you hope for. Not peace. It was the kind of stillness that sets in after something has cracked, and you know it can't be glued back together the same way. Cameron didn't come down for breakfast. He didn't text, didn't call. I imagined him curled up in that small apartment he'd only moved into a few months back, still getting used to the silence of living alone. Except now, that silence wasn't a luxury. It was punishment. The night before had taken something from him. I saw it when he left, not just betrayal, not just grief, but the look of someone who had finally opened his eyes and wished he hadn't. I made coffee anyway, 1 cup, sat at the kitchen table and stared at the empty chair across from me, the one where Cameron used to do his homework, then later argue with Delilah about groceries, then finally sit quiet as if bracing for the next blow. Now it sat empty for good. Harold didn't say much. Not after that dinner, not that night, not the morning after. He stayed in his study pretending to read the newspaper, turning pages without seeing the words. We didn't talk about the dinner, or Delilah, or Noel, and certainly not the envelope. What was there to say? The man I married, who used to fill up rooms with laughter and jokes about old jazz records, now moved like he didn't want to be noticed. And maybe he didn't. Maybe he felt complicit somehow. Or maybe he knew that anything he said would only reveal just how little he'd seen all along. I didn't blame him. But I didn't feel close to him either. The gap between us wasn't new. It had formed years ago, slowly like water, finding its way through concrete. But after last night, it widened. What used to be a silence built on routine had turned into something heavier, like the two of us were roommates in a museum of a family that no longer existed. And me? I felt numb, not shattered, not yet, just still. I moved through the motions, washed dishes from the night before, threw out the untouched dessert, chocolate cake with cream cheese frosting, Cameron's favorite. I folded the napkins, wiped down the table, reset everything like we were going to try again, as if the table would forgive us if it looked normal enough. But it wouldn't. Tables, remember. Every plate, every glass, every chair was a witness now. 3 days passed, then 4. Delilah didn't show up, didn't call either. But I heard through the neighborhood that she'd moved out of their apartment, back to her cousin's place. Someone saw her buying prenatal vitamins at the pharmacy on Main Street, wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy. Cameron showed up on the 5th day, not to talk, just to pick up the last of his things from the attic. He didn't want help. I stood at the top of the stairs and watched him carry down one box after another. Old photo albums, a pair of hiking boots he never wore, a framed art print he once made for a college class. He didn't meet my eyes until the end. "I'm not mad at you," he said softly. I nodded. "I know. I just don't know how to be in this house anymore." "I understand." He paused, then added, "It's not even about her anymore. It's me. I feel like everything I believed in turned out to be marketing." That word hit me in the chest. Marketing. The illusion we put up to make it all look good. That's what our family had become, hadn't it? A brochure for something that didn't quite exist. "I know it hurts now," I told him, "but this pain, it's a clean kind. The kind that comes after infection's been drained." He didn't reply, just stood there, nodding like he was trying to convince himself, and then he left. Harold asked me that night if I thought Cameron would be okay. "I don't know," I said, "but he'll be honest now, that's a start." Harold sipped his coffee, lukewarm, and looked away. "I should have said something," he whispered. "Said what?" That I saw the way she treated him, that I knew it wasn't right. I folded the dish towel in my lap. You wanted to believe she'd change. I wanted peace. You got silence. And with that, we stopped speaking again. That's what heartbreak looks like at 60. Not screaming matches, not slamming doors, just long stretches of not knowing what to say to someone you once thought would know your heart without needing words. I walked past the nursery room we'd started converting when we thought a grandchild was on the way. The crib catalog was still on the dresser. I put it in the trash, not out of spite, just reality. Sometimes hope is a guest that overstays. Later that week, I sat in the backyard, watching the wind move through the trees. The roses near the fence had begun to wilt. They hadn't been pruned since before the dinner. I thought about trimming them. But something stopped me. Maybe the neglect felt honest. I kept thinking about Cameron's face that night, how still he'd gone when the truth hit, like someone not surprised, just finally confirmed. And I thought about myself too, how much I had tolerated, how many small betrayals I had swept under the rug because they weren't loud enough to ruin dinner, but they had ruined everything else. The family was no longer a web, it was a set of islands. Cameron trying to rebuild himself, Delilah nursing a lie she could no longer hide behind, Harold drifting, and me, sitting on a bench outside, wondering how I ever thought love alone was enough glue to keep it all together. But even in the quiet, even in the unraveling, there was something else, a kind of dignity in the ruins. Like once everything falls apart, there's nothing left to hide behind. And that's where truth starts. Not in the dinner, not in the letter, but in the morning after, when you wake up and choose to stop pretending, and that is how you begin again. It was late April when she came back. I heard the doorbell on a Tuesday morning, just after I'd started boiling water for tea. The chime was slow. One long note, one short. I knew that pattern. Not from the sound, but from the hesitation behind it. I opened the door, and there she stood. Delilah. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that didn't look deliberate. Her coat was too light for the breeze that still carried a trace of winter. She looked smaller somehow. Not younger, just smaller, like someone who'd lost their shape. We stood in silence for a moment. Then she said, "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She didn't go to the living room. She didn't look around. She walked straight to the kitchen and sat down in the same chair she had once rolled her eyes in when I asked if she wanted more mashed potatoes. "I'm not here to defend myself," she said softly. I nodded. "Good. Her voice broke. She pressed 2 fingers to the corners of her eyes. "I need you to know I'm sorry. For everything." She didn't cry, not fully. She kept swallowing it down, the way people do when they think tears will weaken whatever last thread of dignity they have left. "I betrayed Cameron. I betrayed you. I betrayed the life I said I wanted." I said nothing. I stirred my tea, even though I hadn't added sugar or milk. "I was scared," she said. "That sounds pathetic, I know. But when I found out I was pregnant and it wasn't his..." "It was Noel's," I interrupted, not as a question. She looked down. "Yes." The clock ticked louder than it had any right to. I never meant for it to happen. I never meant to fall into anything, but I did. And when I found out, I thought maybe I could fix it. Lie long enough to patch it up. Pretend long enough that maybe it'd stop feeling wrong. "And did it?" I asked. "No," she whispered. "It felt worse. Every day." I took a sip of my tea. It had gone cold, but I didn't mind. It matched the morning. "I understand if you never want to see me again," she continued, "but I want to be a mother. I want to raise this child right. And I want..." She paused, her voice cracking. "I want you to be part of her life. If you'd ever want that..." I looked at her for a long time. This woman had once sat at my dinner table like a queen. She'd smiled wide, toasted champagne, called me Mom with a softness that now felt rehearsed. And now, here she was, folded in on herself, trying not to fall apart. And the strangest thing? I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel the need to throw her out, scream, or call her names. What I felt was the urge to decide, not to destroy, but to choose, consciously, what would happen next. I stood, walked over to the counter, and pulled out a small box. Inside was a silver bracelet, delicate with one small charm shaped like a rosebud. It had been meant for the baby, before the dinner, before the envelope. I set the box on the table between us. Delilah looked at it but didn't touch it. "I'm not going to be your child's grandmother," I said. "Not in name, not in duty. That title was broken when you broke the vow that gave it meaning." Her eyes welled again. "But," I continued, "I won't be your enemy either." She looked up, startled. "I believe children deserve love no matter how they came into this world, and I believe in redemption even if it doesn't come packaged the way we expect." She nodded slowly, unsure where I was going. "So here's the deal," I said. You raise that child with truth. No lies about her father, no fantasy to cover your mistakes. You teach her that choices come with consequences, but that love can still grow in broken places. Delilah's lips trembled. And you don't use my son's name to gain sympathy. You don't rewrite history to make yourself look noble. What's done is done. We don't pretend otherwise. She nodded. And if I hear one whisper of manipulation, of guilt tripping him back into your orbit, the door closes. Her voice was barely audible. Understood. I'll drop off what I had saved for the baby. Quietly. No pictures. No public claims. That's not for me. My presence will be known only when needed, not as a performance. She finally reached for the bracelet box and held it in both hands like it was fragile. I'm going to a community college, she said, unprompted. Taking night classes, accounting. I nodded. Good. We sat there for a while. The tea got colder. Outside, the wind picked up. Before she left, she turned and said, You didn't have to give me anything. Not after all of it. I didn't, I said. I gave something to the part of you that might still learn. And then she walked out the door. That night, Harold asked if I was okay. I'm not sure, I said, but I think I made the right choice. Cameron called 2 days later, said he'd heard she stopped by. She wants forgiveness, he said flatly. She wants a future, I replied. Whether she deserves it is up to her to earn. He was quiet for a bit. I'm not ready, he said. You don't have to be. Then he added, but I don't want to be angry anymore. That was enough for now. Sometimes the greatest form of strength isn't in saying no. It's in choosing what yes really means. I didn't offer Delilah forgiveness wrapped in a bow. I offered her a set of terms, human ones that meant I would not forget, but I would not chain myself to bitterness either. The thing is, when you've been broken long enough, you learn to listen for the sound of your own healing. It's quieter than anger, softer than revenge. It's not about proving a point, it's about reclaiming your peace. That night, I stood by the kitchen window, looked out over the backyard. The roses had started blooming again, not where they were planted before. A few had sprouted in strange places, along the edge of the fence, beneath the bird bath, even near the compost heap. Unplanned, uncontained, but alive. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something deep inside me. Let go. Not as surrender, but as survival. It was one of those crisp April mornings when the sun showed up but brought no warmth. The air still carried a chill, even as the garden hinted at spring. I was standing near the back porch, watering a row of new lavender I had planted. Not because I liked lavender especially, but because it grew quietly and didn't beg for attention. That's when Cameron stepped outside, barefoot on the wood planks, holding a thin envelope in his hand. There's no return address, he said. Just this. Says, to CA. He looked puzzled, but I didn't need to see the handwriting up close. I knew the slant of that penmanship. I had once memorized it on birthday cards and back of napkin notes left on my desk in the art room. It was Noel Reyes. Cameron turned the envelope over, searching for a clue. Do you want me to open it? I nodded, slowly. He slid a finger under the flap and pulled out a single Polaroid and a folded piece of paper. The photo had faded around the edges, but the center was clear enough. Noel, much younger, was standing in a garden I recognized. Ours. He was looking down, showing a young boy, about 8 or 9, how to prune a rose without nicking the stem. The boy had his back to the camera, but even from behind I saw the narrow shoulders, the mess of brown curls, the cautious stance, like he didn't want to damage something fragile. It was Cameron. He held the photo in both hands and said nothing. Then he opened the letter. The writing was shaky, uneven, like the hand of someone whose joints had learned regret the hard way. It read, Cameron, I don't expect to be forgiven. I don't think I ever truly earned the word father, and I'm not asking for it now. All I ever really understood was how to care for roses, and a woman who once laughed when I told her that. If by some strange twist you share my blood, I hope that knowledge doesn't shape you too much. I hope you've grown to be your own man. But if the day ever comes when a child asks you, "Why do I exist?" tell the truth, as best you can, not because they need the answer, but because they need someone who's not afraid to stand in it. N. When he finished reading, Cameron didn't speak. He just sat on the porch step, holding the photo, letting the letter rest on his knee. The morning light made it look older than it was, yellowed at the edges like a relic from another life. I didn't sit next to him. I stood beside the porch rail, watering the soil slowly, watching it darken around the roots. We said nothing for a long while. There are moments in life when silence isn't awkward. It's sacred. This was one of them. Noel hadn't left a trail. No forwarding address, no final request. Just a photo from a forgotten day and a letter that wasn't an apology so much as a passing of weight. Not an heirloom, not a confession, just responsibility. And that was so like him. He had always known how to disappear when the story got too heavy. But this time, he didn't vanish in cowardice. This time, he stepped out with intention, leaving not a legacy of ownership, but one of quiet accountability. He didn't try to claim Cameron. He didn't show up with DNA test results or legal petitions. He didn't demand acknowledgement. Instead, he left a truth that could be carried without bitterness, and a request that asked not for love, but for integrity. That afternoon, I placed the photo in a small wooden frame and set it on the edge of the bookshelf in the hallway, somewhere it could be seen but not stared at. I didn't frame the letter. That went into a drawer, tucked between old sketches and broken necklaces. Some things aren't meant to be displayed. They're meant to stay close, folded and quiet. Cameron never mentioned the letter again, but I noticed he stopped deleting messages without listening to them. He returned a call to Harold he had been avoiding, and one day I found him kneeling by the side fence, trimming the overgrown rosemary bush Noel had once planted from a cutting he brought back from Oregon. He didn't say it out loud, but I understood. Sometimes a man honors the past not by forgiving it, but by not repeating it. A week later, I went to the local women's center with a small gift bag. I didn't call ahead. I didn't ask for permission. Delilah was there, holding her baby, a girl, tiny, eyes wide, her whole head covered in dark, thick hair like a character in an old wives' tale. Delilah looked surprised to see me. She froze when I walked in. I didn't make a scene. I simply set the bag on a nearby table. Inside were a few baby clothes, a book of lullabies, and a sealed envelope. She reached for it, unsure. "I'm not here to make peace," I told her. "I'm just here because life isn't simple." She nodded once, and I left without another word. In the envelope, I'd written one line: "Don't worry who she came from. Just remember what she came for." Cameron didn't visit her, but he did send something. A card with no signature, just an embossed rose on the front and a single sentence inside. "Some blooms come late, but they still grow." He didn't need to say more. Not to her, not to me. And I didn't ask questions. Healing doesn't always come in thunder. Sometimes it comes in the steady return of breath, in the way we carry ourselves after the wave has pulled back. Noel left more than a letter. He left a space for Grace to grow. Awkward, unexpected, but real. He will not be remembered as a father, nor a villain. He will be remembered as the man who once taught a boy to hold a rose without bleeding. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. The world doesn't always need declarations or signatures to change. Sometimes it just needs someone to walk away, quietly, leaving behind the right words at the right time. It had been nearly 3 months since the second dinner, the one that never really ended, only unraveled. In the weeks that followed, the house fell into a quiet rhythm, not the eerie kind of silence that makes you ache, but something softer. A silence that filled the corners like dust after a storm, as if even the air had stopped trying to find cracks to escape through. We didn't speak of Delilah. Not out of bitterness, but because sometimes silence is the only respectful thing left between two people who once tried to pretend they could be family. But I did ask about the baby. Each month, the Women's Center sent a short update. Nothing dramatic. Just lines like, infant gaining weight steadily. Sleeping through the night. Mother attending evening accounting class. There was something oddly comforting in the clinical tone of it all. No guilt, no expectations, just facts, like a steady heartbeat after a long surgery. One line caught my eye last time. Client has formally withdrawn petition to cohabitate with former in-laws. That was the moment I knew. The storm had passed, or at least, moved on. Cameron had moved into a small apartment just a few blocks from us. Not too far, not too close. The kind of distance a grown son chooses when he still wants to be reachable, but not entangled. He never once asked to visit Delilah, never mentioned the baby, but on the first of each month, without fail, he sent a check to the center. No note, no return address, just his quiet way of saying, I didn't cause this, but I won't abandon it either. And honestly, that was enough for me. Harold still lived here. He didn't try to apologize again, didn't buy me flowers or start up half-hearted conversations over morning toast. He simply stayed, present. Not as a husband trying to fix things, but as a man who knew he had broken something and didn't want to break anything else. Sometimes healing doesn't look like a reunion. Sometimes it just looks like two people drinking their coffee at the same table and not saying what doesn't need to be said. As for me, I hadn't replanted the garden. The roses Noel once tended had long been cut down. I had let the soil rest, like a wound that had scabbed over and just needed time. I didn't rush to replace them. I didn't feel the itch to fill the empty space. I just watered it. Every few mornings, I'd go out and let the hose run slow across the beds, even if there was nothing but dirt. My neighbors probably thought I was being sentimental or forgetful, but really, I was just waiting, giving the land and myself a pause. And then, on a bright morning in mid-July, I opened the back gate to let the light in, and I saw it. A small green stem pushing up from the corner of the fence. Not in the flower bed, not in the soil I had prepared, just from a crack in the old concrete lining the yard. It wasn't something I planted. It wasn't in line with anything else. A stubborn little thing, leaning out sideways like it had chosen its own spot. I knelt down. It was a wildflower, not fancy, not fragrant, just alive. And somehow it was enough. I didn't trim it. I didn't rope it off. I didn't try to do something with it. I just left it there. That same afternoon, I was going through an old drawer, one of those junk drawers that holds everything from expired coupons to forgotten batteries, and I found a sticky note folded into a tiny square. I almost tossed it, but then I opened it and saw the handwriting, messy, slanted letters from a child who hadn't yet learned where the lines were. It was from Cameron, probably written in high school. If Mom is the soil, then I'm the plant. The one she cuts if it grows wrong, the one she waters if it grows right. I hope I grow right, but if not, I'll grow again, even if it's not in the same spot. I stood there for a long time, just holding that piece of yellow paper like it was the last truth I hadn't ruined. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because some tears are meant to stay inside, like rain that chooses not to fall. That night, I put the note in my wallet, not to keep it close, but to remind myself that sometimes what we plant isn't what grows, and that's okay. The next week, a card arrived at the Women's Center. I only knew because the director called to thank me, assuming I had sent it. I didn't, I said. Can I ask what it said? She hesitated, then read it over the phone. For the girl who bloomed late and survived anyway. No name, no signature, just an embossed rose on the cover. I knew it was from Cameron, and that was when I knew the storm had passed. For real this time. The sharp edges of our pain had dulled. The screaming inside our walls had turned into quiet breathing, and the space between what we lost and what remained no longer felt like a canyon, but more like a garden path. Not neat, not symmetrical, but walkable. That weekend, I went out with a pair of shears and trimmed the last of the dead stems that had stubbornly held on. The last remnants of Noel's garden, his rituals, his secrets. I didn't cut them in anger. I didn't curse his name. I just made space, because even the best soil needs to rest before something new can take root. And when I reached the last bush, the one growing near the back fence, I saw a single sprig arching out toward the neighbor's yard, thin, crooked, but green. I didn't cut it. I left it. Because not every new beginning needs a plan. Some just need a chance. Time passed in a way only it knows how, softly, steadily, without asking permission. By late summer, the air had changed. There was no dramatic event, no moment where someone stood up and declared that the storm had ended. But the quiet was different now. It wasn't empty anymore. It had texture, like freshly folded linen or warm sunlight slipping through the blinds. It was the kind of quiet you could live inside. The house still held its creaks and sighs. The wood still moaned at night. But somehow, it no longer sounded like grief. It sounded like settling, like acceptance. We hadn't spoken much of the dinner since it happened, not out of fear, not out of resentment, but because some moments deserve the dignity of silence. There are things you outgrow the need to explain, and some wounds aren't meant to be reopened. They're meant to be honored and left alone. Cameron had begun to change, not loudly, not all at once, but in the subtle ways only a mother might notice. He no longer hovered around, waiting for my approval or my pity. He stopped trying to fill rooms he wasn't meant to occupy anymore. Instead, he carved out his own space and tended to it with quiet hands. He started a new job, nothing flashy, a small landscape design firm on the edge of town. I heard through a friend that he'd begun taking his lunch in the city park, sketching flowers and root systems into a leather-bound notebook like they were blueprints for something he was rebuilding inside himself. He stopped asking for advice, but he started saying, "Thank you" more. Not the casual kind tossed over the shoulder, but the sort that comes with eye contact and a pause. The kind that says, "I know I wasn't easy to raise. I know I hurt you too, but I'm still here." Once a week, he'd come by to drop off groceries I never asked for, a bag of lemons, fresh bread from the Italian bakery downtown, sometimes a bunch of peonies or baby's breath, bundled in newspaper with no note. He didn't speak much when he visited, but he sat long enough for me to believe he wanted to, and that was enough. Harold, for his part, had not returned to his old self, and thank God for that. He didn't try to fix things with apologies or favors. He didn't hover around the kitchen offering to help slice onions or make tea. He just stayed, present, quiet, sober in the way only a man who's seen what silence can do learns to be. Sometimes he'd sit on the back steps with his morning coffee, staring into the garden that no longer held roses, but did hold space. He wouldn't say much. But if I sat beside him, he'd scoot over an inch, enough for my shoulder to rest near his. He never asked for forgiveness, but he stopped disappearing. And that, in its own small way, was a kind of repair. There were days I still felt the weight of it all. Days when I'd pass the hallway where Delilah once stood with her trembling voice and that twisted smile, and the memory would sting like lemon on a paper cut. But more often than not, I found myself remembering other things. The night Cameron stayed up past midnight, fixing the old wooden chair no one had asked him to fix. The way Harold stopped checking his phone during dinner. The quiet hum of the washing machine in a house where no one was screaming anymore. It was healing, but not the kind you photograph. It was slow, like the way an old scar fades into your skin, still visible, still yours, but no longer hurting. I didn't replant the roses, But I did start composting again. A small gesture, I know, but it meant something to me. It meant I believed in growth, even if I couldn't yet say what would come next. One afternoon, I found an old box in the attic labeled Spring 1989. Inside were pictures of Cameron as a toddler, Harold with more hair, and a younger version of myself, eyes softer, hands steadier. I sat on the floor and looked through them for a long time, and then I placed them back, not because I wanted to forget, but because I finally didn't need to remember in order to believe it happened. That night, I cooked dinner for just Harold and me. Grilled trout, green beans, and cornbread. Simple, clean, familiar. We didn't speak much, but when he reached for the butter dish and passed it to me without being asked, I smiled. Sometimes that's all the peace you get, and sometimes that's enough. As autumn approached, the leaves began their slow descent. One by one, they fell into the yard like soft confessions, unapologetic, necessary, final. And I found myself thinking, maybe this is what survival looks like at this age. Not fireworks, not grand revelations. Just getting up, boiling water, folding laundry, saying goodnight. No one threw a party for our progress. No one documented our return to almost normal. But that's the beauty of being older, I suppose. You learn to spot the miracles no one claps for, like a quiet morning where no one lies, like a family that still breathes under the same roof, even if they don't always speak, like a son who drops off lemons, like a husband who stays, like a wildflower growing through concrete. I found it again by accident. The old scrap of paper Cameron had written back in high school, folded and softened at the edges, tucked away between the pages of a forgotten journal. "If Mom is the soil, then I'm the tree," it read. "She cuts what won't grow. She keeps what can. I hope I get to stay, but if I don't, I'll grow back. Maybe not where she expects, but I'll grow." I sat with those words for a long time, my fingers tracing over the faded ink, my eyes blurring not from sadness, but from something quieter, something close to peace. So much had changed, not in the kind of ways you write headlines about, but in the kind you carry in your bones. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need anyone to say sorry. What I needed was exactly what I'd built. A life where truth had a place to live, even if it took the long way home. Out in the yard, a single wildflower had pushed its way through a crack near the fence. Not planted, not invited, but here, alive. And I let it be. Because sometimes forgiveness isn't about unlocking the door for someone else. Sometimes it's about choosing not to keep bleeding, choosing instead to plant something where the wound once was. If this story touched a part of you or reminded you of something you've carried in silence, you're not alone. I share these stories here on Renvenge Zinnia, where truth, even the painful kind, has its own quiet bloom. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more, and maybe, just maybe, grow something of your own.